Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today, Semantic Interoperability 101, How Clinical Terminology Mapping Advances Interoperability. I'm Michelle Blackmer. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer at Lineate, and I'm delighted to be the moderator today, joined with two of my colleagues who will introduce themselves in just a minute. Before we get to introductions, I want to tie off on a couple of housekeeping tips. First, logistical reminders. We are broadcasting live, and we are recording this session. If anyone registered, if obviously you all attending did register, you will receive a link to the recording within 24 hours so that you can replay or share with colleagues. If you have any questions at any time, please do not hesitate to send them in through the chat. I will either field those questions in real time, responding with my team here, or we'll follow up after the webinar if we have an overflow of questions. We'll grab those questions and make sure that all of them get answered. It'll be the intent today is for this to be very conversational. Myself and the two panelists, we sincerely enjoy chatting. We talk about this topic all the time, and we want to bring you in on that conversation and make sure that you get your questions answered as part of this dialogue. We plan to cover a variety of topics, including how Lineate Health Term helps support data quality governance and health information exchange. Given that you're all healthcare experts, I'm sure that governance and information sharing are top of mind for you, and we're excited to talk about how Lineate can continue to play a bigger role. How CareCom customers can work with Lineate to further expand their cross-organizational interoperability goals. What semantic interoperability is, what clinical terminology is. I know these terms can be loaded and complex, and it's our goal to make them very approachable. And then why Lineate, finally, why Lineate chose CareCom and HealthTerm and this team to work with to bring you these solutions for the future. So without further ado, I will introduce, I will have my colleagues introduce themselves as well. First, Tami, do you want to introduce yourself to the audience?
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. Thanks for having us here, because I think this is a really important topic. But quickly, I've been in the healthcare space for longer than I can really care to admit. And working in payer spaces as well as population health management. And then for the last 6+ years, with CareCom with the HealthTerm product, and then of course moving over to Lineate. So I have a very broad reach in terms of what I've had my hands on, from HIEs to deployments at county sites. There's a whole host of things that I've really dived into in the healthcare space. So with that, I'll hand it over to Jacob.
Thank you, Tami. I'm Jacob Hanse. I'm the founder of CareCom. So I've been a little more niche than you, Tami. I've been only in more or less terminology for the last 20 years. So a little detour around travel agencies and software for that, and then into CareCom for the last 22 years. And after a year or two, we were focused on terminology. So most of my career has been on terminology.
Wow. Well, I know in prepping for this webinar and just getting to know you both that you're experts in this space, and I'm really looking forward to the conversation today to bring that expertise to the audience, which includes many Lineate customers. So thank you to all of our customers who are joining today to learn more. You know, Jacob, when you mentioned that you founded CareCom and developed HealthTerm, why? What was the driver? What were you hoping to achieve with that?
The driver was actually the Ministry of Health of Denmark. I was, as I said before, I was working with software for the travel industry, and during the .com period, these companies didn't have it so well, so I left and I wanted to start my own. So I started being a consultant for the Ministry of Health and starting building their patient registry. And after being a consultant for a year or two, they asked us if we could help them with SNOMED. They were looking at what to do in the future with the clinical codings and wanted to find out if it either should extend ICD-10 heavily, which we're using in Denmark, or we should try to go into SNOMED. And they got SNOMED in their hands and saw there was a flat file of 350,000 concepts and 1 million terms and 1.5 million relationships, and say, okay, what can we do with that? Please do a browser for us. And we did a browser for them. And then they started translating Excel spreadsheet, translating English into Danish, as all hospitals, of course, use Danish. And that ended up in a mess. Having all these spreadsheets going forward and backwards in emails, and no one knew who put in the last comment. How are we following a red line in all the translations? They had to stop. So they more or less put me, some of the clinicians from the Ministry of Health and the translation agent into a room and say, find a solution. We need to have a better workflow. We need to have everything documented, and we need a way to handle this in a bigger manner. And we come up with HealthTerm. So that was the beginning of HealthTerm. That was actually the translation project based on SNOMED, using a web-based interface so people can work from everywhere in the world, from home, from the office, from the clinic, and then have the specialist joining as well. So
it's to resolve a real problem, right? That now we're seeing that problem become top of mind for even more organizations as they think about broader health information sharing. It's nice how it's played out. You were like a very early example, right? That was a very early example.
That was an early example, but that was only translations. And then over the years, we went into more nationwide translations, but also growing into all kind of other code systems. So not only SNOMED, but ICD-10, LOINC, RxNorm, drugs, whatever that is local, and some in US, some in other countries. But we need to have tooling for all of them. So that's the main driver. Was not only the translation. We need to go into all the other aspects of handling master data and clinical terminology.
Yeah, Michelle,
and that's really what appeals. Yeah, Tami.
I was just going to say, this really just speaks to really what terminology is all about too, is finding that common language. And whether that's Danish or English, or it's SNOMED or it's ICD-10, this really just capitalizes on what that theme is here, that we really have to get a common language to do anything in healthcare.
Yes, and when I think about, we show this often when we're talking to customers, that when you are sort of communicating just to one other trading partner, maybe the language barriers are not so complex, but as we look at regulatory requirements and consumer expectations for information to follow them seamlessly across all parts of healthcare, we see this volume of trading partners explode, and the language barriers become even more constraining. And so what we really love about the addition of HealthTerm to the Lineate portfolio is that, in addition to moving data and thinking about who people are, ensuring that those people, we can really know what's been happening to them across all of their healthcare episodes, and clinicians can be able to take care of them. So it's such a good point you raise up, and really the core of the webinar is kind of demystifying this. And so, Tami, what is clinical terminology? Is it that translator that you were talking about just now?
So really, clinical terminology, to make it really simple, it's defined. The definition in itself is really the standardized terms and their synonyms to record patient findings and events, maybe interventions, with enough detail to really support clinical care, decision support, outcomes research, quality improvement, all of those parts, pieces, and components. But it has to be efficiently mapped and documented in different ways, obviously, but singing that from the same sheet of music, all speaking the same language, and having that common language. So this clinical terminology that we have, whether it be SNOMED for clinical documentation, or LOINC for lab results or orders, or ICD-10, for example, for diagnosis, CPT for procedures and billing, those types of code systems are really those standard clinical terminologies that we use here in the US, and those are called out in the US CDI as well. But there are other standard terminologies around the world too that we don't particularly use here in the US, but those are the standards that we should all be using and that we rely upon to appropriately document a patient's record. So again, in a nutshell, it's really that common language to document a patient's medical record. So not only that—
It's like a common language that's not common though, right? I pulled up this slide because what I hear you saying is there's these different it's common, but there are different code sets, kind of like different dialects that are really all trying to describe the same thing.
Well, same things sometimes. Like for example, LOINC is really used for things like those lab tests and orders and observations, things like that. LOINC has its own niche, really. CPT is a lot of the procedure types for billing, for example. So those are kind of niche where we get into more ICD-10 or SNOMED that is a little broader and almost interchangeable. Then you go to RX norm, which is medications, as well as NDC. NDC is more on the manufacturer type, like this is a particular manufacturer, here's the drug, but and that's very granular in terms of what strength and dosage and all of those things, where RX norm, it has just a little bit different nuance to it. So they're kind of the same, but they each have their own play in this. They each have their own part in the clinical documentation.
I see. And so as long as everyone's operating in their own, what I kind of hear you saying is as long as everyone's operating in their own, I don't want to say silo, but their own workflow, there's less pain. But when they, when you try to have those workflows come together for like a bill or a problem list or a patient accessing their record through the portal, that's maybe where there's a collision of confusion. Is that right?
Yeah, there could be a lot of confusion because not only are we talking about different standards, and of course, standards, we each have our own, but the added issue with some of this is that at the source of this information, when it's generated through a patient encounter, something like that, there's an opportunity there for either a free text entry or it's a custom code that the provider or that specific organization might generate to document this. And the labs as well, labs have proprietary code systems for that. So what happens is that when it all comes together, now we've got much different codes and descriptions for the same thing. So the role really of a terminology solution is to get those all together. So again, we're all speaking from the same language. So it's really a task. I mean, I don't think there's ever going to be an opportunity in life that we are going to have everybody really speaking the same language, but how do we apply that translator and make it helpful, not only for somebody who's doing analytics, but for the patient too, when they're looking at their record, they go, oh, I've done that test 17 times instead of I've done 17 different tests that look kind of all the same. I'm not really sure. So.
And another point of that, I think, yeah, I just think that just having everything updated, if we take a large provider, they may have up to 1,000 different applications. Many of them use, for instance, diagnosis or procedures, all of which needs to be updated all the time. Yes, ICD-10 is only maybe updated once a year. The drugs are every day. So we need a centralized system that makes sure that we can spread updates out. We have CallPoint, we have Rhapsody for the integrations. They're speaking to most of the systems anyway. So let's also put in the terminology and that have one source of truth that makes sure that everything is up to date. That would take all the errors on integration heavy down, but also make it easier for us to speak the same language as Tami just spoke about. But start with just having everything up to date.
if I'm thinking about our audience, obviously includes quite a few people who probably rely on CorePoint and Rhapsody today, and so they're, I'm sure, dealing with moving lab codes all across the enterprise and SNOMED. So how, what do you imagine is happening for them today? We haven't had a question from the audience yet about this, but how does health term help them specifically? Like, what might change for them if they were to adopt health term?
I think there's two places, and there's two cases in it. First of all, if you take 3 years back when COVID came on, maybe they didn't have updated all their systems with the newest diagnosis code for COVID or the different lab tests. And then the integration engine will fail because it's trying to put something from system A to system B, but it wasn't updated, it wasn't in sync, and we will have an error on the integration part. Or we'll just transfer whatever text is in there, and they cannot see that it's the same, and by that aggregate it into a graph or anything. So depending on the integration and how it's set up, either it will errors or will just pass on with a text. But if you just pass on with a text in an HIE or likewise, then you cannot put this together and use it for aggregated information. So it's limiting the use of the data. And then there is what Tami talked about. If we're using different settings, different setups, then the terminology server, if you load all the different local codes and different sets of SNOMED ICD-10 into a centralized engine again, connected with the linear CorePoint or Rhapsody, then we can all look it up. We can all talk about the same things, and we can transfer from A to B. And I think Tami explained that so good before, but that's where, so the connection between the terminology server and the integration engines is unique. That's a perfect match, and that's of course also why we joined the two companies.
I think there's a little bit more too. So, I know, and thank you, Jacob. I really do appreciate, and I echo what you're saying too, but there's a little bit more that we can do too, especially, and I mean, I'm talking from the Rhapsody perspective, from my knowledge base. So within Rhapsody itself, there you have an opportunity, and you can do that transformation work as it stands now, where you can, essentially do a mapping, a very simplistic mapping from one code to another. So if you have this local or unknown code, and you can map it to an ICD-10 code, let's say. So you have that ability now, but the maintenance part of that can be really problematic for you. If there continues to be concepts that you have to map within a Rhapsody table, for example, that list can get really big and hard to maintain. And then how do you maintain it with what it's supposed to transform or map to? That's a whole nother issue. Now, using something like Health Term with our pre-built connectors, because we have those connectors between Rhapsody and Health Term, great, we can connect that, get that in there very quickly. Now you can take some of that work, which is may or may not be really the role of an integration specialist here, that is a lot of folks on our call, not take it out of their hands to say, you don't have to maintain this any longer. Let's put this in the hands of the folks who, that's really their job, is to make sure that this data is coming from these organizations, and we're mapping it appropriately. So we're going to take it out more the techie side, and we're going to put it maybe into a clinical side of the house that really owns that data or information, giving them the opportunity then to continue to update it efficiently and effectively, not just a big table that's unmanageable and untenable moving forward. So there's just a little bit more that we can do, being able to connect to Rhapsody really quick, and then be able to efficiently do this for you.
And Jacob, I think you had another.
Yeah, I was just saying, when Tami says efficient and smarter, what do we mean by that? What we mean is that when the ICD-10 or SNOMED is updated, and if we can see that that's a code that is in the mapping table, then we can take that out easily. We understand how everything is connected in a terminology server. So it's so easy to find out, oops, we have for instance, a map set where this code is in, we need to update that. Or there's a new code, we need to put that into the map set. So the connection between mappings, code system, and value sets / subsets is unique. That's what you can do in a terminology server, which you cannot do in a simple table or a spreadsheet or anything else. So it's all about the tooling, the smartness, and make sure that everything is connected.
That I think there's a question from the audience that is tapping in, I think, exactly to what you're saying, Jacob and Tami. The question is, the destination electronic medical record will not accept the new codes if the code is not in its dictionary. How is that leg of the integration addressed with this type of solution? And if possible, when you're answering, if you could speak specifically to Meditech and Epic, that would be the audience really appreciate.
Yeah, I can speak to Epic. Epic is loaded by spreadsheets, so a very, very complex spreadsheet. And we have worked with Epic, and then we can export in that format. So correct, it's not easy, but we can export out in that and have the integration work that way. The Epics are not ready to work on direct API lookups, which we can. We can have an EMR, just all searches, all lookups could be done directly into the health term database, but they're not there. So we need to have, for instance, a NATLI run where we export this out in the Epic format. MedTech we haven't done. I'm happy to look into that together with any clients and make the same integration work. It's so important that we have this one source of truth in the middle and then we spread it out. And I'm sure we can do that with MedTech too.
I think further to that too, because we are really a web-based application and we can, we support that API lookup really. So we're just that single source of truth that you don't have to install individually, but you can look to health term, to the Lineate health term instance to get those codes, get the information that needs to generate and populate the EMR, like Meditech or when Epic is ready, Epic. So those are the types of things that we're looking forward. We're looking to the future to make sure that we don't have to have these static tables and databases, that this is really an evolving, these are evolving code systems. This is, our patients are evolving, our healthcare organizations are evolving. So why wouldn't our solutions that wrap around those be evolving as well? So that's what we're really trying to push forward, is how do we use our technology that we have with Lineate, with Rhapsody, with CorePoint, with identity as well. How do we use all of these parts, pieces, and components together that are under this interoperability suite that we have at Lineate to advance our patient interactions and our outcomes and our reporting capabilities? Let's advance that. Let's move. Let's push that needle and make this much more. Yeah.
Oh, I brought this slide up while you're both speaking, because I think the question that you're answering, and maybe just for the audience, helpful to see a picture, is this inverse. And so if a code isn't available in Epic, or you're taking information maybe that came from a Cerner ambulatory environment wanting to make a match into Epic, it can really call health terms dynamically and then make that that integration step would happen much more smoothly because health term is inserted into the process. Is that the right way for the audience to think about it?
Yes, that's one way of thinking of it. Health term is like to see it as a component in the middle, like the integration engine. It's just taking care of all the content. Make sure that it knows all the different variants and all the updates of it. And from there on, we can work it out. So in this slide, we have different ways of saying the same thing, but as long as health term knows all those, it can translate that in to either a LOIN code or a SNOMED code or whatever that is needed in the other end. But it could also be that if you're looking at integrations, now a lot of the audience probably have these integration engines are looking at FHIR. FHIR needs a pointer to all the terminology. Where did you reference this code or this subset or this mapping? All these are built into health term. So we go out with a full FHIR support and can help on all these integration. And that's super important going to the next step. So the future is probably FHIR, but we need all this point in the middle to point at and say, I know that this terminology from this point.
Awesome. And then we have another question from the audience. Is health term SaaS or on-prem, or can it be deployed either way? And then they explain, I know that health term can be SaaS or on-prem, but then they go on to ask, in other words, are you pushing the dictionaries down to CorePoint, or is CorePoint calling out to a SaaS service in the architecture?
Good question. So health term can be deployed on-prem. For some installation, it would be nice to have it on-prem, as it's all about performance. How fast can you answer? How many milliseconds? Down to 3 or 4 milliseconds. Others say it's not important that it's in 3 or 4 milliseconds. We can call out to a SaaS environment hosted by Lineate. So we can do both. Some would like to leverage a larger setup. Others would just like to have their own. So we can also, health term is so scalable, so you can also have it multi-tenant setup. So you have different tenants on the same on-prem installation with different needs, different setups. So it can be very, very advanced setup. And I'm happy to go into the details and look at the different settings and suggest how it could be done. And Tami can do the same.
Yeah, and we can also do something here at Lineate too, and do a managed solution as well. So much like all the rest of the offerings at Lineate, with the Rhapsody as a service or CorePoint as a service, and health term is in there too. So terminology and how we're going to deploy that. We have such flexibility with that. We can really meet the needs of any of the clients. And honestly, as Jacob said, our clients are all so unique. And so sometimes the way it's deployed or how it's used is really unique too. So we're really open and flexible to learning about different things with different clients. And with our over 90 APIs, I'm very, very confident that we can meet the needs of how they need to have data returned to them or presented in some way for their unique use cases.
And take
so
it
very
down to
flexible, but not pushing down to, not changing the CorePoint dictionaries. It's calling a service essentially for this particular question, but with a ton of flexibility.
Yep. Yeah.
And we have a couple more.
Yeah, and just saying that it's a Linux server, so you can with a container, so you can place it very easily in the cloud or very easily on-prem. It's not complex.
Very flexible deployment options. Pre-built connectivity between the engines and health term. Yeah. Is there a trade-off? Like when you talk about flexibility, is there any trade-off in the confidence of the terminology lookup depending upon the deployment option, or confident the same on-prem or in the cloud?
Yeah, I'm confident. Yeah, the confidence level I think is the same. Of course, when you're looking at how you're looking at performance might suffer a little bit, right? When you're looking at on-prem or something versus something else. But in terms of the confidence level in the information that you receive back, it's going to be the same either way.
Awesome. And then I think the examples that I've shown just happen to be standard to standard mapping, like ICD to SNOMED. But the question is, can we support custom coding to standard? And Tami, I'll let you have that one kind of as a heat up for you.
So yeah, you did. You really did tee that one up. Thanks, Michelle. So really, I think that's one of the really great parts about health term is the ability to ingest those local or custom codes and then be able to map that to a standard. And we have some really terrific functionality that supports that, and that you can really leverage all the information that comes through from the data stream and be able to appropriately, with the highest level of confidence that you can have, map that to whatever standard you're looking at. And we have a lot of secret sauce in the back end and some things that are configurable in terms of the algorithm and how you match those things, which are just really, they're just really awesome. I know I'm kind of overusing that word, but I can't tell you how really amazing that part of our solution really is, and how that really leverages and capitalizes on all the information that you do have to be able to drive those decisions about how it's mapped to a standard. So
and
yes,
maybe one question that comes up often is, okay, fair enough that you can do these mapping with local codes, but how do I get them in? And getting that in is either by Excel spreadsheet or tab separated or comma separated files, and they can come in very, very complex formats, full history, a lot of attributes, and we support all of that. We even have a conversion tool, and we don't have to be something that Lineage does. It's open for the client, of course. So we don't say, oh, you have to buy a tons of professional services to have this done. No, you can actually do all this, and the system will correct, saying, oh, I don't understand this, you have to correct line 4 or something else. And it also calculates the difference. So all the updates you're coming with, it finds out what's from what we have in the database and what you're coming with. Let me have the difference and apply that with full history. So important that you have full control of all your data, and that's what we're good at.
Yeah, your data is your data, and that's how we think about it with our clients, is that it's theirs to own. We don't have we don't control it in that way, so you can't get it out once you put it in. We don't control it that way. We believe it's your data, and you should have the control of that data. But conversely, if you need our support and you need our help, we're here for you. So we're here to do advisory services, or even in terms of mapping services. We'll get you up and running, we'll help you, and then we'll support you that if you want to take on that ownership and do those services yourself, you can, or you can utilize the Lineate team. So again,
we
flexibility.
We have a couple more questions. So a really awesome point, but I want to make sure we get to these. The NCQA dictates that we're unable to change the code. Does the output contain both the original code and the mapped code for auditing purposes? And so there's visibility and transparency kind of throughout the process?
That's a good question. Yes, we will see this as where do you store it? Because if you come with a local code and you want to map it to something else, we have what you came in with and what you get as a result, and then you store it in your EMR, whatever. So it's a matter of where do you store the result, because if you're in the EMR and saying, I only have the local codes and now I need to report, and I go through health term and I just report it directly and don't get the results stored again, then I can see the issue. And then that's a very, very good question. In some of the large projects we have been running in the European Commission, we took all that and we stored it as described here, both the source and the target, so to say.
Yeah, and really, it's that flexibility as to where you want to invoke the health term API or the lookup there. Where do you want to do it? At what point in your data journey are you going to do this? So it could be at one spot versus like after it's initially stored somewhere, and then you're doing that lookup and you've got the additional information on it. And really you can invoke that health term lookup at whatever part of the data journey you want to.
So you don't have to change the code, really, right? Is that what I hear you saying? Like the codes can stay in their source in the way that they were, and the mapping happens behind the scenes, so you always have that lineage back to the original data.
Yeah, and it's flexible in terms of how you want that to present and where you want it to present and what goes on from that. And with, like I said, with over 90 APIs, I'm confident that we can get that presented in the way you want to, and then our technical team can help you in terms of which API you're going to use and where you're going to do it in your data journey, how it's going to present.
And this is probably related to that. If can we use health term? We talked about mapping non-standard codes. But if the upstream and the downstream system both require mapping to their own local codes, can health term support that complex workflow? Or how does health term support that workflow?
Again, it doesn't matter what you're mapping to and from. You can map anything to anything in health term. As long as you find them both in health term, you've got them both imported into health term. You've got that data there. Now you can map in multiple different ways if you want to. So from source A to source B, from source B to SNOMED, take your pick wherever it lies. And whenever you're calling information about a specific concept, you can get the information about, yes, it maps not only to source B, but it also maps to SNOMED. So you can get the full scope of where this piece of information lies and what else it applies to, what other types of mapping or even a subset or a grouping, what it might apply to.
And even in those scenarios, the auto mapping or matching can be applied in conjunction with custom lookup. Is that?
Absolutely.
And even, yes, so mapping come in different flavors. In the old days, we were having a source and a target tree, and you can take this one and come up with suggestions, and there's some algorithms to find the best match. Then we went into auto mapping that did all the groundwork for you and find the best match based on a lot of great algorithms. Now we can go to a stage where we say, okay, you can actually define the algorithm yourself for this particular map set. So I'm coming from these local codes to this standard. Please apply these algorithms and use all the attributes. We can go in and take different approaches, and then of course demos for different settings. But just imagine that you have an HIE and you have a lot of different participants that come with a lot of different drug files in different formats. Then what your brain is doing is looking not only at the preferred term, but also at the root, the strengths, and all the other things, and match that over to some other attributes on the other side. All that you can configure in an algorithm so it optimizes the match and take a lot of load from you. That's the future of how to optimize this process, because we know it's a lot of your work to do.
Let's say that there's a medication code coming from a provider that uses a primary system like Metaspan's generic provider ID, and I need to translate that to RX norm in the disease surveillance system. Can HealthTerm help with this?
Yes, of course it can help with it.
Okay, and then how do you get that data point to HealthTerm and then communicate back to RX norm? Is that kind of that architecture we were looking at before?
Yeah, we need the local code system imported into HealthTerm, run the algorithms on it, and then have somebody approve it. It's all about quality when we talk about master data. And it's all about that somebody had looked at it and said, yes, it's okay. Or said, if it's over and above 80% in the score mechanism, I'm good enough with the system to say yes to that. Everything underneath, somebody needs to look at. And that's from client to client. They need to set up their own rules, their own workflows. Everything can be customized, but it's all about having good data. And someone to have a 5-step workflow for each little mapping to approve it before it goes out and be published and can be used. Others said, I'm the only person in this organization that knows anything about this. I'm doing it on my own. All can be supported in different workflows. It's up to the client to set the rules and the settings for how this should be done.
And I do want to just kind of echo what Jacob said about the validation. Our algorithms are very strong, and they are going to give you the best possible match based on how we define that, or we help you define that. And those things are very, very strong to begin with. But at the end of the day, if there's ambiguity in a code system, in that source code system, someone and it should be really validating that information, because this can impact patient care. It really truly can. And so that's why we do encourage and support that type of a workflow, that there is someone that will validate and say, yes, this is what I meant by, this particular code. Because in all honesty, we've seen some very, very, let me just say, unique descriptions for codes that could be interpreted as almost anything. I mean, there is just really a lot of ambiguity. So that's why we created a solution, and Jacob and the team created that solution to ensure that we have that flexibility and we have the workflow and we have the groups that are associated, the user groups that are associated with that, to be able to validate that and make sure that, yes, this is really mapped to the correct target code system.
As we're talking about this, there's a question of, obviously it's, there's so many different languages being spoken. Health Term offers quite a bit of flexibility, simplifies the burden. And people are asking if we support, if there's a list of code sets that we work with and our MPI is an option. And so I just want to field that yes, we do. And we do have a list and we do support custom codes. And so there's a brochure on lineate.com that lists them all. And the team's going to share that link in the chat so that all of the attendees will have access to that. There's also a question on pricing. And while, I know we don't want to go specifically, we can't get into the details for each particular customer on this call. In terms of pricing model, like what the pricing is based upon, do you want to let the audience know how we approach that topic? Maybe Jacob?
Yeah, I can talk briefly around it, saying that I think that normally we'll go on looking at how many lives are the system covering, and then have a matrix of lives and how many modules do you see. But there can be many aspects into this. Is it an OEM agreement, or is it an enterprise agreement saying, is it just in your software that it's used, or is it used across the whole settings, whatever is in this state or whatever. So it's not so easy to explain, but we are happy to take the dialogue and then find a good solution. I think if I just may say one more thing, Michelle, and say the terminology server, and I think we've been very focused on the mapping. I brought in a little bit about the updates. Tami also talked a bit about subset and groupings. The things we may miss to have the whole thing around is that we are also seeing clients that are now saying, okay, one thing is to have the standard code system or even our local codes, but we need a tool to maintain our own acronyms, synonyms, patient-friendly terms, and clinician-friendly terms. We need to build our own vocabulary to support our clinicians the best way. That's what we do from some of the largest Ministry of Health in Scandinavia, but also for providers in US. It's a need to support the clinician, give them the best search results, give them a vocabulary that they understand and can work with. And for one department, it can be one set of codes, and for another department, something else. But it's tied together underneath, and that's what we manage so well.
This point you're making right now, Jacob, this is really why, at the core, when we look at solutions and merge them, add them into the suite, we remain committed to this person-to-person interoperability. And I think the first time I talked to you, you were explaining just that, like how to reduce the burden on everyone, but in particular clinicians, and let them speak their language, let them have what did you had a particular word when we spoke about it, like they maintain their control, or not control, there was something eloquent. Do you remember what that word was? Otherwise I'll rack my brain.
Which word are you using? But we can put this, it's getting nitty-gritty details, but having extensions and pun extensions, and we can put different settings in. So one department can come up with a synonym they like, and another department called it something else. But underneath, it's tied to the same SNOMED concept, and everybody can make integration work. And that's what we want to do. We want these clinicians to have a workday that is easy for them and says exactly what they want. Then we get happy clinicians. Happy clinicians are good clinicians.
We are at the kind of approaching our end. There's quite a few more questions from the audience. So I just want to assure the audience that if we don't get to your question, we will follow up. Some very specific questions about like our HCC codes included. So I think let's make sure we follow up on those. But as a last question, general question, I am curious to give you the chance to talk about kind of what are some interesting use cases. I know we have HealthX teed up here. You mentioned Ministry of Health. Jacob, do you want to talk, Tami, to take us home on kind of how HealthX is using this? They're a large HIE in New York, I think mirror many IDNs, HIEs. public health agencies that are on the phone.
Right. So being a very large HIE in New York, they have a lot of participating organizations, and they were finding there was a lot of custom or local codes that were being sent to the HIE. And so part of their data quality initiative is to help with the standardization of this data to be able to really report on this accurately and get some better information really about their patient population. So HealthX did do a very large project in this big data initiative. They're using HealthTerm on the back end to support that. And their initial, I want to say the first couple of months they were doing this, they had a bucket really of over 140,000 concepts that were not standard. And so when we're talking about the scale and the scope of these concepts, and this was just in the first couple of months of this, that they had over 140,000 concepts that they needed to make sure that they could map to a standard. And they did so using the HealthTerm tool on the back end. And in this space of about 200 hours, they were able to quickly and efficiently map those 140,000 codes. So if you do the math, that's about, what is it, 700 in an hour? And that's with the validation part that comes into it. So they started out with, here's the codes, this is what it looks like, we're applying the algorithms to it. Now our baseline and of course our algorithms learn and grow from the data that we ingest. And so then the level of confidence and the score for these also improved as it moved forward. So then they were able to validate and get that data standardized in a much quicker fashion. So about 200 hours to do over 140,000 concepts to standardize those. And HealthX has some great data initiative, their data quality initiative kind of statistics on their website, which is always great to see. But we like to see those moving and those projects to standardize and the importance of it and why it's so important to HealthX. And we were happy to support them through that too.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, I hope that resonates with people in the audience, because I see the HIEs as, you know, they went first in showing how this broad health information exchange works, and they've set best practices, worked through best practices for infrastructure. And now I know that so many IDNs and health systems and public health agencies are trying to figure out how do we replicate the architecture and solve those same problems. And so it's a great example that transcends boundaries. So, well, Jacob and Tami, it's been really, really nice talking with you today. The audience is extremely interactive, so we appreciate all of the attention, all of the questions. We'll follow up. How, you know, if people want to learn more about HealthTerm, obviously, you know, lineate.com, click contact us and we'll reach out. We'll follow up with the folks who attended. And if you have any questions specifically for anyone on the panel, definitely reach out to either of us directly. We're happy to chat, first name, last name at lineate.com. And we look forward to continuing the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.